Some breaking news. U.S. Supreme Court, a decision is now in on a challenge led by Republicans to late arriving ballots in elections. Shannon Bream has the ruling. She's got the news and the headline now from the U.S. Supreme Court. Shannon.
All right, guys, this is not a win for Republicans who were challenging this. Mississippi has a state law which allows ballots to be counted, mail-in ballots after Election Day. If they come in, they're postmarked and meet the state requirements. But it is a 5-4 loss for Republicans, and an interesting cobbling together of who wrote on this. Justice Barrett wrote the opinion. Justice Roberts joined her along with Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. So those five stuck together on this. The dissent comes from Justice Alito. Thomas Gorsuch and Kavanaugh join him. And essentially what the majority said is that these federal statutes setting Election Day don't prescribe, or they don't stand in conflict with states that want to say, okay, we have a procedure to count ballots after Election Day. Justice Alito, writing for the dissent, says today's decision is inconsistent with the terms of the Election Day statutes, contemporary election law principles, 2 centuries of historical practice, and the case law on the question presented. So if you're a state out there that counts ballots after Election Day based on your state law, that state law will stand. We wait on more opinions now, guys. More.
What's up, family? Real talk. The Supreme Court just handed Democrats the keys to cheat in elections, and Trump's allies are absolutely losing it. This ruling is being called the biggest betrayal in modern political history. So let me break this all the way down in plain English. The receipts are unseen. We're talking about a 5-4 decision that fundamentally changes what Election Day even means. And here's the wild part, family. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sided with the liberals. John Roberts joined them too, which honestly shouldn't surprise anybody at this point. This Supreme Court ruling says states can count mail-in ballots days, even weeks after Election Day. And that's opening up a whole can of worms that's going to affect every single election moving forward. And we need to break down exactly what happened here and why it matters to you, to me, to everybody in this country who cares about fair elections. So here's how this case went down. The Republican National Committee challenged a Mississippi state law, and this law is wild. It allowed ballots to show up and get counted up to 5 business days after Election Day. But here's the caveat they threw in. As long as those ballots were postmarketed by Election Day, Mississippi said they're still valid and they could still be counted. This wasn't some random court case, family. This was the RNC saying, hold up, this doesn't match federal law. Justice Samuel Alito wrote the dissent, and he was absolutely right. He said the federal law is clear as day. Election Day means Election Day. That's not complicated. That's not some gray area. Election Day is supposed to mean the day the election happens, period. But then a majority, led by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, says something different. They ruled that the current federal statutes don't actually prohibit states from counting ballots that arrive after Election Day. So think about that for a second. They are interpreting the law as it's literally written on paper, not as common sense would tell you it should be read. The dissent came out swinging and said this is a problem because it extends the federal election beyond the day Congress picked, and it destroys uniformity across states. Some states counting ballots weeks later while others count them the same day. That's not a uniform system, family. That's chaos. But here's where the majority basically shrugged and said Congress can change it if they want to. They said it's not the Supreme Court's job to fix this from the bench. They're saying, look, if you don't like this ruling, Congress needs to step up and clarify the federal law. But we both know Congress isn't going to do that because Congress can't agree on anything these days. Now, let me paint a picture for you of what Election Day actually means to regular people, because this is where the real problem starts. When you go vote on Election Day, you are expecting something basic. You expect to cast your ballot, you expect those votes to get counted, and you expect to know who won. That's the whole point. That's what Election Day means to Americans. You vote, ballots get tallied, we find out who's running the country. Simple, clean, done. But look at what's happening in other parts of the world. Take Colombia, for example. I'm talking about a country that just ran their election and they had to count tens of millions of ballots. Millions, family. And you know what they did? They counted them the same day in person. They figured it out. They announced the winner that night or the next morning and they got it done. Nobody was waiting weeks for the results. Nobody was wondering if late ballots were going to flip the whole thing. And they understood that if you call something Election Day, the election should actually be decided on that day. But somehow in America, the most powerful nation on the planet, we are acting like counting votes on election day is impossible. We're telling our citizens that election day doesn't actually mean the election gets decided that day. We're just pretending we can't do what countries all around the world figure out every single time they vote. Election day now means the day people are supposed to vote, but it doesn't mean the day we find out who actually won. That's not election day anymore, family. That's election month. That's election whenever we feel like counting. And the longer this goes on, the more the meaning just disappears. And when ballots keep arriving for weeks, when the vote totals keep shifting days, and sometimes weeks after election day, people start asking legitimate questions about what actually happened. Is this on the level? Are these real votes? Why is the outcome changing? And that's not paranoia, family. That's not conspiracy thinking. That's common sense. That's people looking at the system and seeing something that doesn't add up. And the real problem here isn't even about whether fraud is happening legally. The real problem is the appearance of it. When you see vote totals change dramatically after election day, when late ballots shift their entire outcome in ways that don't match the early voting patterns people saw, they notice, they see it, they feel it. And once people lose confidence in the system, you got a problem that no court ruling and no explanation is going to fix. That's when people stop believing that the game is fair.
The justices are wrestling with a question about whether states can count ballots received after Election Day in a case that could have an impact in nearly 30 states that allow some kind of grace period. The RNC is challenging a Mississippi law that allows ballots to be counted up to 5 business days after Election Day if they're postmarked by Election Day. Justice Alito was among the biggest skeptics during Monday's arguments.
Independence Day, birthday, and Election Day, and they're all particular days. So if we start with that, if I have nothing more to look at than the phrase Election Day, I think this is the day in which everything is going to take place.
But Justice Kagan questioned the impact of that logic on practices like early voting.
It seems to me it's a rule that prevents early voting, because you're basically saying there are 2 things that have to happen, and they have to happen on Election Day.
Meaning the casting of the vote and the receipt of that vote. But attorney Paul Clement, representing the RNC, said the argument is that the process be consummated or completed by Election Day. A number of the justices also raised the issue of the potential for the appearance of fraud when votes arrive and are counted after Election Day. And there wind up being shifts in vote totals and how that may impact public confidence.
Pratt's post-election mail-in ballots declined by 1/3. So statistically, the population of people that send in their ballots late reduced for Pratt by 1/3, increased for Nithya Raman by 80%, and Karen Bass 10% less. If you just look at the mail-in ballots before and after Election Day as a comparison. I don't know if there's a socio-political way that you can assess those statistics and assume that these are individuals casting their individual vote for who they think should be mayor of LA. Basically, the concentration of incremental votes that Nithya Raman got came around the Skid Row area in Los Angeles. But when you look at the basic statistics of what happened in person, mail-in before, mail-in after Election Day, it becomes a real statistical quagmire on how did this sort of a socio-political shift happen in such a way that it did. Now, there was a report published, and they highlighted the 2018 California midterm elections and the challenges that they saw arise in that midterm elections because of some of the legislative changes that were made. First, California Assembly Bill 1921 legalized the practice of unlimited ballot harvesting in the state. What that means is that any individual in the state of California has the right to go and collect ballots from any other individuals, regardless of relationship, fill them out, and send them in. California, 2 years later, 18 months later, also passed a law that made it permanent that every person registered in the state of California would get a ballot. So tens of millions of ballots then get mailed out. Then there was another series of laws that were passed that said anyone can register to vote. You don't need to prove your citizenship. You can use a gym membership card as an example. So anyone can register to vote. There is no proof of ID when you get a ballot. There is no demonstration that the person who fills out the ballot has anything to do with the individual who's supposed to be voting that ballot. And it is legal for an individual to go out and collect hundreds or thousands of ballots, ship them in, and they will all qualify in these kind of mail-in ballot voting processes. So there's nothing illegal or fraudulent going on. In fact, the system is operating exactly as intended. It has been set up and structured in a way that with the right construct, you can get an individual appointed, not elected, but appointed to a particular role in government under a, quote, free election in California.
And California right now is the living, breathing example of exactly what happens when you put all these pieces together. Look at what went down in the LA mayoral race. This is real. This happened recently. And it shows you how the system can work exactly as designed and still produce results that make people's heads spin. I mean, for example, look at Spencer Pratt. He came in with solid momentum. He had real support in early voting. He had legitimate mail-in ballots showing up before election day, and the numbers were looking like he had a real shot at winning this thing. And people looked at those numbers and thought, okay, Pratt got this. Then election day comes and goes, and the ballots start arriving. And family, the shift that happened after that is so dramatic, you can't just hand wave it away as some normal voting patterns when you look at the post-election mail-in ballots. The ones that came in after election day, Pratt's support dropped by a third family. Meanwhile, Karen Bass, those same late arriving ballots increased by 80%. And think about that number, 80%. That's not a small adjustment. That's not a minor shift in the data. That's a complete reversal of the entire election outcome based on ballots that arrived after the deadline passed. And here's the details that matter. When you look at where those late ballots were concentrated, it came from Pacific areas, Skid Row in Los Angeles. Not to mention, supposedly, they were paying homeless individuals and giving them money in exchange for them continue to feed their bad habit of being on drugs, being very intoxicated, which unfortunately feeding their demons in exchange for the vote to stay in power, allegedly. Right? There has been some controversy around that, and individuals such as journalists and content creators going out to Skid Row and asking them, and homeless people openly admitting that they came down here, that if you voted for Karen Bass, they would give you $3 to $5, sometimes $2, allegedly, okay? But not to spread across the city. As you guys can see, the ballots were concentrated at Skid Row. Not evenly distributed, concentrated in particular neighborhoods. Now, I'm not standing here telling you someone broke the law. I'm not saying illegal activity happened. What I'm saying is the system in California is structured in a way that makes this possible. It's set up to allow this. California passed Assembly Bill 1921. And this law legalized unlimited ballot harvesting. And let me be clear about what that means, because it's important. Any person in California, any person, can legally go out and collect ballots from other people. They can gather them. They don't need to be related to those people. They don't need permission. They just collect ballots and mail them in. That's legal. Then California took it further and made it so every registered voter automatically gets a ballot mailed to them. We're talking tens of millions of ballots just flowing through the mail, not asked for, not requested, just arriving at addresses. Then they passed more laws saying you can register to vote without proving you're actually a citizen. A gym membership card works. A library card works. You show up, you register, boom, you're in the system, and now you're getting a ballot mailed to your address. And here's the kicker. There's no ID requirement when somebody picks up a ballot. There's no verification that proves the person filling out the ballot is actually the person supposed to be voting it. So now you got a legal framework where someone can walk around like hundreds or thousands of ballots and mail them all in, and it's all technically legal. And the system is operating exactly as intended. Nobody's breaking any laws, but when you combine unlimited ballot harvesting with automatic mail-in ballots, no citizenship verification, and the ability to count those ballots weeks after election day, you created a situation where the outcome can shift dramatically based on timing. And that's not fraud in the courtroom sense. That's a system deliberately designed to create opportunities. All right.
We have some breaking news. Supreme Court handing down several major decisions this morning.
Yeah, joining us this morning to kind of sort through them is constitutional law attorney David Cole. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, so we didn't get a ruling on birthright citizenship, but we did get a ruling on mail-in ballots. Supreme Court saying ballots received after Election Day can be accepted by states. President Trump was claiming that mail-in voting is vulnerable to fraud. So the question, I guess, with this, and you can explain the ruling as well, could this impact his current efforts to get a voting bill passed?
Sure. The Supreme Court here held that the current federal laws that we have now about how to handle elections don't prohibit a state from having mail-in ballots where you have a few days after election day to count, late coming ballots. And a lot of people vote that way. And so there was dispute about whether or not the current law prohibited that or allowed it. Now we have an answer. It allows it. But Congress can change that law. That's not constitutional. And so, of course, we all know the SAFE Act has been the subject of a lot of discussion in Congress the last several weeks. This may give some political fuel to that fire, or Congress may say enough already. Let's just let it sit for this election. But the ball is now in Congress's court.
All right. Let's also talk about the president's authority to fire a member of, really fire anyone, I would think, because, the president, he's in charge. He does have removal power, but really not explicitly stated in the Constitution. So it's been interpreted certain ways through judicial rulings or like political practice. But now the Supreme Court's going to rule.
Yeah, it's been a back and forth for as long as there have been agencies, which is as long as we've had a country. And, agency heads don't want to be fired and presidents want to fire them. But today is about as clear as it's ever been from the Supreme Court that the president's in charge. He can't do it himself. He gets to pick the people that he works with. If he doesn't like you anymore, he can replace you. And there have been a lot of efforts by Congress over the years to put in for cause limitations or this kind of limitation or that kind of limitation. Held can't do that. If the president put you in, the president can take you out. That's part of being the president.
And if another president put you in there, then he can also take them out, right? So, like, I know the Federal Trade Commissioner, Rebecca Slaughter, that was a big one that was put up. But without citing anything, the president can now do that.
Right. If Congress says you can only remove the members of XYZ commission for cause, well, the for cause language just drops out. That had always been kind of out there. It was this old case from the 1930s called Humphrey's Executor. It had barely been hanging on the last few years. And the Supreme Court, I think the language in the opinion today was whatever is left of Humphrey's Executor, we're done. No more Humphrey's Executor. So if you're the commissioner, a commissioner of the FTC or something, you need to make sure the boss is happy.
And so they allowed the Federal Reserve Governor, Lisa Cook, she gets to keep her job, correct?
Right. Different situation there. And the court went to great lengths to say that the Federal Reserve is in a long tradition running all the way back to really the founding of the country of having a national bank. And there are that has its own tradition, its own sets of rules. Congress has passed all these special protections there. There's a unique role that the Federal Reserve governors have in dealing with the market and the regional banks. And the president can still remove you for cause. But the court said that means something in that context. And you got to dot the I's and cross the T's. You can't just say it. And so they're going to keep fighting that fight. But the Fed is different from the other agencies out there that are affected by the other ruling today.
Got it.
All right, so let's be straight about what the Supreme Court actually decided here. They basically said, based on how the current law reads right now, states are allowed to count ballots after Election Day. That's the ruling. But they also threw in there that Congress can change this whenever they want if they decide to step up and do their job, as you guys just heard. Congress has the power. Congress can tighten this up tomorrow if they wanted to. The problem is nobody's holding their breath waiting for Congress to do anything because Congress can't agree on what day it is, let alone something that's important. Here's the political reality that everybody's dancing around. Democrats are never going to support a law that tightens up mail-in voting because they benefit from a loose ballot counting system. That's just facts. Republicans want stricter rules. They want Election Day to actually mean something, but they don't have the votes to pass anything without Democratic support. So what happens? We are stuck in a deadlock. The court says it's legal under current law. Congress won't fix it. And every election cycle, the definition of Election Day gets stretched out a little more. Justice Alito had it right in that dissent, family. He said Election Day should be the day the election is actually decided. Period. It should be the day people vote, ballots get counted, and we know who won. That's what it means in every other country. That's what logic tells you it should mean in a functioning system. But the majority of the court decided that's just not what the statute says when you read the actual language. So they're not going to force the issue. Now, some people are going to come out and say this is no big deal. They'll tell you ballots are post-marketed on Election Day, so technically they're cast on time. That's playing word games, though. That's luring your way around the actual problem. with lawyer word salad or lawyering, like I was saying. Again, I reiterate. But when ballots physically arrive days or weeks later and completely change the outcome of an election, the public loses faith, period. And public confidence in elections is the foundation of everything, family. If people don't believe the system is fair, if they don't believe the rules apply the same everywhere, if they don't believe election day means something real, then the whole entire structure falls apart. This ruling proved one thing crystal clear: the Supreme Court isn't going to save us from this mess. We thought maybe they'll step up and clarify what the law actually means. They didn't. They punted. It's on Congress now, and Congress has shown us year after year they're not going to act on the things that actually matter. So where does that leave us? A future where different states have completely different rules, where ballots arrive on wildly different timelines, and where the outcome can shift weeks after most people think the election is over. That's what we're looking at. The Supreme Court had a moment. They had a chance to stand up and clarify what election day actually means in this country, and they walked away. They said it's Congress's job, and we both know Congress isn't going to do it. So we're stuck with a broken system where election day doesn't really mean election day anymore. And that's disappointing, family, but it's also a wake-up call for all of us. We can't sit here waiting for the courts to fix everything. We need to demand that the people that we elected to represent us in Congress, actually do their job and clarify this law. Now, listen, the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 3, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their own dishonesty. And that verse is talking about honest scales, fair measurements, clear rules that don't shift depending on who's counting. You can't build a system on moving targets, family. You can't ask people to trust a game where the rules change mid-play. Election day only means something if it actually means something. If the deadline is the deadline, if the rules apply the same way everywhere, if everybody knows what what the expectation is from the jump, not exception, but expectation is from the jump, that's when people trust the system. But when you start allowing ballots to come in weeks later, when you let some states count them differently than others, when the rules bend based on who's in power, you are breaking the scales and you are making the measurement dishonest. And what the scripture is telling us is that a system built on that foundation doesn't last. It destroys itself. And for folks who aren't spiritual, it's even simpler than that. You can't have accountability without clear rules. And you can't have fairness without consistency. And if the finish line moves every time somebody's about to cross it, the race is rigged by definition. Doesn't matter if it's legal or if everybody's following procedure. If the rules themselves are loose and flexible, then the whole thing falls apart. And that's why this matters. That's why election day has to mean something concrete. That's why the Supreme Court failing to step up is dangerous for all of us, no matter what party you lean toward. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about this ruling. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your post notifications, and share this out so more people understand what just went down and why integrity in the system matters to every single one of us. Spread that peace, love, and positivity, family. Let the love supersede the hate. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.